Hi, my name is Jack, founder of Posterspy.com, and welcome to another Let's Talk Art video. This time we're in Cambridgeshire, England, to chat to comic writer and illustrator Emma Vieceli. So, let's talk art. So firstly, thank you so much for being part of the series.
You're very welcome.
So you've been freelancing for about 10 years, nearly 11 now.
Yeah.
Over 11.
Yeah, 10 years last year.
Amazing. That's an incredible achievement, really. What would you say is the scariest thing about going freelance?
It's the weird double dose of excitement and fear in knowing that there's no security anymore. I went freelance having worked regular jobs for quite a long time, so I didn't go... I know some people take that plunge really early on. With me, if anything, freelancing was something I almost fought against for a while. I'd been making comics for fun, but by the time I went freelance, I was actually working for a video game company. I liked my day job. I got my first contract, and even then I thought, yeah, but it's not enough. I can't quit my job. It seemed such a fantastical thing. Eventually, obviously, I did. It reaches a point where if you're earning as much from your hobby as your job, you start to think, well, maybe it's time to give it a go. So I did it knowing I had a book contract to go into, which gave me a bit of security to jump into. But even then, you're thinking, yeah, but what when that book finishes? What then? What then? What then? And I remember distinctly driving away from my day job the last time I left that office, and it was a job I really liked, driving away and just trying to get my brain around the idea of, tomorrow I'm not getting up and coming to the office. Tomorrow I'm getting up and relying on myself, relying on my own motivation. That's pretty terrifying, actually. So I think, yeah, just being the insecurity of it, like knowing that no one's going to tell you what to do next.
And do you even still have that fear now? Is it something that you worry about?
Yeah. And I think that fear is actually a positive. You need that
Keeps
fear.
you going.
Yeah. Because the moment you relax, if you sit there and go, sorted, I've got work set up for 6 months, I'm fine, that's not enough. You've got to be, by month 2, you're already there going, right, what do I go to after that 6 months? You have to have that fear. Otherwise, yeah, getting complacent is dangerous in freelancing, I think.
And you mentioned the first contract you got. What was that?
So I'd done little jobs before it in terms of illustration gigs or like bitsy and how-to books and stuff. But the first full book that I was paid to do was Hamlet, which was a bit like jumping in at the deep end. It was, we joked at the time, it was a brand new, so Self-Made Hero was the publisher. The idea of this manga Shakespeare line was brand new. And myself and Sonia Leong, who was assigned Romeo and Juliet, we were kind of coming into comics as well as professionals for the first time. So between us all, it was very new, and we were choosing to do it with Shakespeare. And we said, well, either this is going to end our careers before they start, and we're going to be run out of town with pointy sticks, or it's going to change the way people view Shakespeare, change the way people view comics, and create a fusion that will get some traction. And thankfully, it went the second way, and it went well. Or in fact, we've got, from our pile in front of us, this is the Chinese edition of Hamlet, which is so surreal to see. So it's been translated into different languages. So it as a book has done very well. Me as a creator, I look back at that and I just sort of cringe a bit because I'm like, 10 years old. Because we look at our older work and we're a bit... But I have to be super proud of having achieved it. To dive into a book like that was, a big deal.
So you say that this was your first contracted comic. What kind of things were you doing before?
I've been drawing forever, like for fun. And I think probably like a lot of people who end up doing a job that they love doing, I don't think I ever thought it was going to be a job, a real thing. So to get, obviously when I said it was the first contract, it was because the first time someone gave me money and a contract to make a book. But before that I'd been making comics anyway. I started relatively late with comics, but I got into it through a group called Sweat Drop, who were essentially a group of friends who, when I went to my first ever comic convention, it was an anime convention actually called Minami. Like a lot of young, shy artists, I had a very confident friend with me who was able to take me up to the table and go, my friend draws, because it's always someone else. They're heroes, those friends who are the ones who present their artist friend, because the artist friends won't ever present themselves. And yeah, she said, my friend draws, and I got chatting to these guys. And essentially at the beginning, all Sweat Drop was what we would call a circle. It was a comic circle where we chatted online and we decided to combine our funds. So we would book a table at a convention because none of us had money then, we were super young. You book a table, you share the cost of the table, and you all sit behind it with each other's comics. And by comics, what we were making back then were literally folded, stapled photocopied things, and we would sell them for like £1.50 or something. And that was the origin of Sweat Drop. So through Sweat Drop, I had a title called Dragonair, but we started with those little tiny comics, and then as years went by, we realised we wanted to encourage other people to get into self-publishing as well. We did a lot of workshops and events. We partnered with lots of companies to try and kind of move forward the idea of publishing in the UK, doing your own comics. And then through the process of that, we also set ourselves up as an independent publisher. So we were still operating as a circle, but we were doing it in a way that we had ISBNs, and we had, well, in fact, so Dragonair went from being the little folded stapled things to being a book with a spine. I can remember...
Some nice gold foil.
Nice gold foil. The excitement the first time we did, it was an anthology, it was our first book with a spine. And the difference going from folded thing, A5 comics, to a book with a spine was the most exciting thing. And you're just kind of holding it going, oh, we made this.
So you mentioned earlier how you don't really have a formal art background, you didn't learn it at school, instead you just kind of took it on. Is there anything you can recommend for people who haven't been taught art but want to get into it?
Art is so subjective and objective, and I'm one of those people, I don't ever want to say do what I did or don't do what I did. In retrospect, if I had done an art course, I would have found it a lot easier diving into Hamlet and understanding perspective. I would have found it much easier to learn some of the most basic art techniques through a course rather than literally having to learn them as I do them. There's no question that technically my work could probably be better if I had had training. On the flip side of that, another of those beauties of comics as a career is it's not essential to have that training. It is quite possible. I've done it, a lot of people have done it, it's very easy to enter, not very easy, it's quite possible to enter the industry with passion and a strong portfolio and a willingness to learn. So I would never suggest someone don't do an art course or do an art course. It's really got to be what works for you. As it was for me, I stopped pre-GCSE doing art at school for various reasons, largely because in my school you could only choose 2 out of music, drama and art. You could only choose 2 of them. So I went for music and drama because that was what was more relevant to me. So art just got sort of dropped. It became something I did for fun. But I think if it's something you're passionate about, you're doing it all the time. And I was. Every time I wasn't doing anything, I was always drawing. My friends joke, even now, their parents will remember when we were kids at school, they'd know I'd been around at their house because all their telephone books or everything was just covered with drawings because it was everywhere I was, I had to draw. So in terms of recommendations, if you want to get into the industry and you don't have formal training, you can either consider doing a course if you feel like it's something you want. Otherwise, these days, there are so many YouTube channels, there's so many experts sharing tips online. If you're willing to do your research, you can probably find the information you need. Draw. Sounds ridiculous, but I genuinely have spoken to people who will spend a while gathering a few pieces into a portfolio and then waiting around, and they're like, but how do I get in? It's like, you're not drawing, you have to be doing it. Yeah, like just learn as you do it, but also just consume, read comics, and don't just read them and go, oh, that was a good story. If you're looking to do the art, you've got to see how an artist does it. And it's not just about how they form their lines, it's about the spaces between their lines. You want to, if there's a panel that stands out to you, really analyse that panel and really go, what have they done? What makes it look that good? So it's about not just consuming things on a superficial level, but consuming them from the point of view of how would I do that? Like, how have they put pen to paper and made that work? If a course works for someone, then that's great, but it is an industry that doesn't require that. So long as you're willing to put, you will have to work twice as hard because you're going to have to learn technical skills that other people might have been told.
And you mentioned perspective and things like that. But of course, one major thing about comics is anatomy and getting characters from different perspectives with different postures and movements.
Yeah.
Was that something that took a while to get used to as well?
Yeah, I'm still learning it. Like, I don't think I know a single artist friend who would say, I've nailed it. I never have to think about it again, because there's always going to be something else comes up. Or some days, and thank goodness for things like Twitter and the internet because we can share these feelings, sometimes you might be a professional artist who's been doing it professionally for 11 years, and one day you get up and you just can't draw, and you sit there and you try and draw something you've drawn a billion times before, a person looking sad, and it just doesn't come out, and you don't understand why. There's no explanation for why. Just happens sometimes. So yeah, things like anatomy, yeah, particularly, especially you having multiple characters in a panel and how they interact with each other, takes a while. It definitely takes a while. And I think I was as guilty as anyone else that my first early sketchbooks, obviously before I was doing it for a job, but my first early sketchbooks, there were lots of people with their hands behind their back or their hands in their pocket or their hair over one eye, like anything I could do to not have to draw certain parts of a figure. Which then, obviously, as you get older, you start to realise, yeah, you can't do that. It's no good trying to shortcut it. But again, if you're willing to do the research, there are so many great resources now for learning anatomy and perspective, whilst also remembering that art is your own. It has to be your own. When I do workshops or books I've worked on for how to draw, Sweatdrop did a couple of how to draw books, and we were always keen, all the way through them, to never say, draw like us, because that's no fun. You don't want to draw like us. What you can do is learn the rules so that you can bend the rules. So the way I approach teaching comic art is the idea that what you're putting on a paper is a 2D representation, your interpretation of something that you're seeing in a 3D environment. So it's about taking what you see around you, especially people, taking what you see, breaking it down into basic shapes, and then building it back up. But someone can teach you how to break it down into shapes, but you're the one who has to learn how to build it. You learn how to build it back up.
Would you say working digitally helps with that?
Well, to some level, obviously I still work on paper when I'm penciling, or if I'm just doodling or drawing, I'll use paper. Digital artwork did change my life, there's no question. I feel like as a process as a whole, the comic making process, digital comic making changed a lot. Doesn't mean it made each individual part quicker. I think there's people who tend to think that, oh, if you ink digitally, it's obviously quicker or it's obviously easier because you're inking digitally. Really what you're doing is no different from on paper. You're still holding a pen and you're still putting a mark down. And if anything, when you're working digitally, I find it slower than on paper. On paper, I'll live with my mistakes. On paper, I'll do a line, it's not perfect. That's fine, I'll live with it. It's authentic. When you're working digitally, it's too easy to just go line, delete, line, delete, line, delete. So actually, I probably spend longer inking than I would do on paper. However, the process as a whole, I mean, things like lettering or just generally being able to send your pages off to a publisher without having to clean them, without having to scan them, in that respect, digital has helped hugely. In terms of anatomy, I'd say actually, yeah, it has in some ways because it may be braver. Things like learning use of blacks, like solid blacks. When I was working on paper, if I'd spent ages drawing an illustration, I would not have had the confidence to then whack a load of blank ink onto it, because if I ruined it, it's gone. That was a terrifying thought. When I started working digitally, using my Wacom tablets, whatever else I'm using, you have the confidence because you know that, well, if I fill it and it goes wrong, it's on another layer, it's fine. I'm not messing up my original work. So in that respect, yeah, digital gives you the confidence to experiment more. Same with anatomy, where else you can try stuff out because you know that ultimately, if it doesn't work, you're not going to ruin your illustration.
So you have this motto about comics, for everyone, about anything, by anyone. Yeah. What would you say is the best thing about the comics community? I
think that it is that. It's fab. It's got a very handy acronym, you see. Yeah, about the comics community specifically, it's a lot bigger now than it used to be. I always say it's quite a small community. In many ways it is quite a small community, but it's like a big, small community now. I like that it feels a bit like a nomadic community because you go around to different conventions in different countries and you see a lot of familiar faces. And I'm not just talking about the creators, I'm talking about the fans, the publishers. You see the same people. I think the community sees itself as exactly that, a full industry. I think it's dangerous to think of it as an industry of people who make comics and then some people who buy comics. Whenever I refer to the comic industry, I include in that industry retailers, marketing, people who buy the comics. Like, we together form that community. And I don't know if that happens as much in other industries. I feel like that's maybe quite a comics thing, and I think it's a really positive thing. But in terms of the acronym, FAB, yeah, it's something I believe in because maybe because of growing up in comics where I did have that thing thrown at me where someone would say, well, no, this one's for boys, or this one's for grown-ups, or this one's for this one's for that. I guess because I believe in stories, and I believe that stories are, for me, ultimately about the characters in them and how they interact with each other and the worlds they're in. So for me, I don't necessarily think of myself as a fantasy artist or a sci-fi artist, or, you know, I just want to tell stories. So I don't want to get tied into one particular type of story or one particular genre of story. And I also think that comics have to be for everyone. I want everyone, no matter what their their colour, their denomination, their whatever they are, they should be able to walk into a shop and pick up something that they see themselves in. Comics should be able to do that. And then to take that even further, they should also feel like they can make it. Like, no one should be telling you if you can and can't make comics. Everyone can make comics because everyone can tell stories.
So over your career, you've worked on a lot of different properties and on many different comics. But one comic which you've been working on for a long time is Breaks, which you co-created and illustrate. Could we talk a bit more about that?
I would love to talk more about that.
So Emma, this is Breaks, a comic that you co-created with Malin Ryden. How did this all get started?
So there's sort of as many twists in the story of how this came about as there are in the actual story. But it starts going back several years with a game called Dragon Age, BioWare's Dragon Age, mysteriously. I was a huge fan of the game, and at the point when I'd finished the second game, I had a gap while I was waiting for a publisher to sort of contract, and I thought I kind of fancy writing some Dragon Age fanfic. So I did, started doing some of that, met some other writers online, was following some writing, some were following me. And then after a while of doing that, because it's a really creative group, some people said, hey, why don't we just step away from Dragon Age for a moment and do like a creative, collaborative writing project? To which, of course, some they're thinking, I've never done collaborative writing, this sounds a bit nerve-wracking. And this is all done, importantly, in masks. Like, no one knows who anyone is. We're all working under pseudonyms. But I was like, oh, okay, yeah, give it a go. And the idea was to take a character where you had a story that maybe wasn't complete yet, and you throw it into the mix so you can write a chapter, a paragraph, whatever you want, and then someone else will come in, pick up the story, throw something at you. So it forces you to ask questions about a character that you've got that you might not have asked otherwise. So I joined this group, and there's one particular writer who I'd been following their fanfic. They were a brilliant writer, and they'd been following mine. And as this project went on, we started to realise that our characters that we'd thrown in, something was happening with these characters. There was something meshing and a story was forming that ended up being stronger than either of the stories that we'd thrown into it.
When you were putting Breaks together as a comic, how did you take the novel and elements of the script and actually take it to a comic strip?
To get to this, yeah. So the way we decided to break it down, Malin, obviously Malin's an amazing writer, but she works in prose. She'd never written comics before. She reads comics, so she knew how comic storytelling worked. And as someone who'd never written comics before, I thought what she was doing was amazing, actually. But we decided that because I'm who I am and I do what I do, I was going to have to make the comic. Obviously, I was going to have to draw the comic, do everything else. So we thought if she takes the book that we'd written together and she breaks that down into issues, she writes a draft script for each issue. So she would literally take what we'd written and find a way of translating it to comic storytelling. And what was great is that even then, she would occasionally throw in an extra moment, like something that hadn't happened in the book. So it still maintained that fluidity that we had originally. We had a roadmap of a story, but she might be writing out an issue and then she'd just throw in like an extra moment. So when I got the script through from her, I'd be like, oh, I see what you did there.
In terms of actually illustrating this, how long would a page typically, take you to create from getting the script to then penciling it and it finally being
So, in terms of the actual art process, so Breaks is quite unusual. I mean, it's unusual in many ways to me as a project, but it's unusual in that we have such ownership over it, which from the beginning we wanted. It's part of the reason, again, when I said I wanted to do it as a comic, even then we still didn't say let's do it as a comic with a bigger publisher. It was like, let's do it as a comic, but release it as a web comic. Let's keep it hold of it, because I do projects. Obviously, I'm working on something like Olivia Twist for Dark Horse, for instance. I'll get a script through, and I don't know that world. I'm there as a writer, as an artist. So the script will come through, and then part of your job as a comic artist is to translate that script to the page and to really kind of get behind the words that you're reading and figure out the best way. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle of what's the best way I can convey what the writer wants me to convey, which is why a comic is a unity of a writer and an artist. One can't exist without the other. The artist creates the world, the artist visualises everything. So it takes a lot longer to form a page. With Breaks, because we've spent, by the time we started this comic, and it's been going 4 years already, and even when we started it, we'd already been writing it for about 4 years, we know these characters inside out. Like, we trust each other with these characters. This is why we can throw extra stuff in and it will always feel natural, because we know them so well. So with this one, when it comes to penciling, so it all starts in something like this. Interestingly, for years, like a lot of artists, I thought I need to get really good pencils and really good paper and draw it on big A3 and shrink it down, because that's how people work. And it gradually occurred to me that I'm a digital artist and all I'm going to do is scan my pencils in. So actually, it doesn't matter how I produce them, it's got to be comfortable. And I found that working like this, this is literally an entire book of breaks as it appears in the final book. And because I pencil it this way, I can see the flow. Because to me, again, it's not about a page or a panel on its own. It's about the entire storytelling of it. So if I pencil it this way, I can literally read the book as I go. So because I know the story so well, I almost have the visuals in my head when I start. So if you look at some of my sketches for other projects, they're a lot messier. There's like a thumbnail stage, or they're a lot messier. Mm-hmm. With breaks, to be honest, it pretty much comes out on the page as it's going to end up being. So on the pencils level, I'll maybe pencil 5 pages in a day or something, like just sketching them out. Then it gets translated. So I go from this, it gets scanned in, it gets thrown up on Clip Studio, formerly known as Manga Studio. I've got a Wacom set up in the Cintiq, my mobile studio. And then I start doing the full comicking process, which is basically inking it, toning it, lettering it, shading it, and getting it like formatted. But even then, I've come up with ways to refine the process because we're running it as a webcomic. And it's only a page a week, but I have to do it alongside all my other work, so I can't, we knew I couldn't go full colour. I didn't want to go black and white though, because you want it to stand out a bit. So I've kind of refined this process of you doing this one shade layer over the whole thing and multiply. So probably it's about 3 to 4 hours to get from that to that.
That seems quite quick.
It is quite quick. It is, and in an ideal. But
then that's because you've had years of experience doing that.
Yeah, and because I'm in control of it. Mm-hmm. Like with breaks, even when a script comes from Mullin, I mean, she'll joke. There's one particular scene that was set. It was set in a shed, and there was a bike rack outside of it. Of course, when the script came through, I was like, a bike rack. That's going to take ages to draw. And Mullin was like, it was your idea to put a bike rack in there. And then of course we realised, oh wait, I could just like put less bikes. It's our story. I can choose how I do it.
So in terms of the storytelling in breaks and pacing and action sequences and things like that, how do you convey that on a page?
So comicking, I like to use comicking because it's a good term. You yourself coming from filming and filmmaking, you'd be surprised how many similarities there are actually between that and comicking. Essentially, when I get a script through, what I'm looking at from a point of view, and I think of doing theatre or whatever else, I'm literally looking at a script and in my head I look at that and I think, okay, so I become the actor, the director, the set dresser, the lighter, all the elements of filmmaking essentially, or theatre work you're looking at on a page. And a lot of the same techniques will cross over. So there's shorthand in comics that whether subconsciously or consciously, the reader will respond to. So for instance, if you have 4 panels that are quite narrow, small, they're the same, exactly the same size in sequence, subconsciously that feels like that's quite a quick edit. But if you turn the page and then you've got a large like open space, it's a big panel, we're zoomed right out, that's a slow moment. You're not going to think of that as a fast moment. So similar to having a camera, where you place that camera, the angle you choose for that camera, do you want a sinister effect? Do you want it to look more peaceful? Are we zoomed right into someone? Are we coming out? So all of those effects translate over. But then, because comics is not film, like a lot of people will see comics as a stepping point to get to film, which maybe in a way, yes, but it's important to remember that comics is its own medium and can do things that no other medium can do. Because you've got, what I've just talked about there in pacing is the panels, like how the panels get laid out. But then you've got obviously what's going into those panels. You've then got how you use light and dark on a page. So for instance, I was saying about the quick panels being a quick edit, and a large open panel taking a bit longer, you can have the same effect if you then combine those quick panels with also more tone, more shade, more colour, whatever you're using, and getting darker and darker and darker and darker, and then you turn a page and boom, and then you've got white and open. That's going to have an effect as well. There is actually a page in this book, which I'm going to see if I can find now. This is complete spoiler because it's one of the big emotional moments of the story, but it illustrates this point so well, so I'll try and show you that quickly. There's a page in here that we didn't do in the webcomic, but we always knew we wanted to do it in print because it's something that, again, can only work in a print comic medium. And it's because we've got a very dramatic scene, we've got a build-up, you can see it gets... Most of the pages in breaks are quite open and pale, but this scene got darker and darker and darker until it hit a point where boom, we just had a full page of black. Because we wanted that emotional beat, and you give the reader that moment, again, subconsciously or consciously, to just pause and take in what's just happened. And that's as dark as it can get, you know, it's a full page of black.
And it is very different to, you know, all the other pages, which are a lot lighter.
Yeah.
And obviously it's going to stand out
to
anyone reading it. Is this something that, you know, has taken you a long time to figure out, or is it just a case of reading other comics, experimenting, getting inspiration from things?
Getting inspiration, from a lot of things. There's certain artists, especially Japanese artists, that I grew up reading, because they were working often in black and white, exclusively in black and white. It meant a load of techniques were coming out of how they can't rely on colour. So they would come up with lots of techniques of how you can use that black and white effectively, how you can gradient, how you can tone, how you can build a page, build a moment using just ink on a page. So that's quite inspiring. Otherwise, a lot of it is like, it sounds really cheesy, but it's just sort of feeling your way with it. Like, it's stepping back, and rather than thinking, I have a page of paper and I need to work out what I'm putting on that page, it's just to feel the scene and to let it kind of flow naturally, to think if I was directing it, how would I put it? How would I want to see this played out? And think that way, taking into account things like your panel sizes, the light and dark contrast, and even how you use the panels themselves. So there's a moment here where we've got a panel is literally fragmenting and crumbling off the page. Again, that's the kind of thing you can only do in comics. So it's kind of getting used to comics as a storytelling medium by reading them, by experimenting. You've got to absorb anything to be able to learn it, and then channel your story through it and try not to overthink, like, oh, I'll measure out my panels, and just to think, actually, I feel like this moment needs a bigger space. This moment doesn't need a big space. Do I need to show this in this moment? What's the important part of this scene to show? An example I often give in workshops with people is we use abstracts in comics quite a lot. So if you've got two characters, if we were drawing this scene right now, it's me and you sitting on a settee, and we could draw it, if we chose to stylistically, as just our headshots, expressions changing, headshots, and that can be used in certain circumstances well, or we might want to change it up a bit. Again, using that film technique idea that once we've established that we're sitting here, we don't need to keep showing that there are two people sitting on a settee. So it might be that they'll focus on your mug, but your voice is still happening. Or like my hand next to my mug, but is my hand clenched? Because that's going to say a lot. Regardless of what the words are that are saying, the visual of a clenched hand is going to mean more than a relaxed hand. So it's like pulling moments out, again, similar as you would probably in filmmaking, but channeling that through techniques that can only work on a page.
So I guess the ultimate question is, Emma, where do people read this? That is the ultimate question.
So depending on what access they've got, online for free, completely for free, like one page a week, every Monday updates at www.breakscomic.com. Or if they want to support us, they can buy the book, which would be awesome. So this particular edition is super limited. It's got a load of extra stuff. This one is not through shops, unfortunately, but if they come to a comic convention where I am, I can sell it to them at a table. This one they can get everywhere. So any good bookshop, comic shop, just, go in and ask for this title, or Soaring Penguin, sell it directly on their site, or any online retailers, which I shall not specifically name, you can get it from. So the books should be available everywhere, or join us online and read it that way.
Amazing. So thank you so much for talking me through breaks and the process involved. It's been great to talk about it. And thanks so much for being on the Let's Talk Art series.
Thank you.